Welcome to Dalma Makes. In this video, I'll share with you how I transformed this selection of household waste items into this wizard tower, overgrown with verdant flora. The objects I gathered are this candle tin, this chalice-looking container from a fancy ice cream, this drink lid with nice detail on the side, a regular bottle cap, and some toothpicks. These things, stacked on top of each other, were the perfect shape for the wizard tower that was coalescing like a vision in my mind. Both of the larger objects have a sort of sleek surface, and I didn't want to deal with that when painting. So I decided to add a layer of paper towel to the surface. I even sanded the little plastic cup first, just to give it a little bit of tooth, so my adhesive had a chance to stick to it. And I started using a gel matte medium to attach little torn up pieces of the kitchen towel. But it wasn't taking well, so I switched to a more fluid medium for the decoupage stage. This will give me a surface that will be easy to paint and glue other things too, as well as giving me some free texture without effort for any part in the background that may peek through in the final project. In any case, it is a solid foundation, and although it delays the more fun and creative steps of the project by having to leave it dry thoroughly, it leads to an eventually easier process, as I won't have to fight with acrylic paints not sticking to the sleek surfaces and peeling off. I try to avoid any straight edges in the paper towel, as the torn soft edges and gentle overlap ends up with a more organic and random result. I covered the entirety of the candle tin and the plastic chalice, but I didn't do that for the smaller things like the bottle caps I'm going to incorporate, as I know that they will be covered with other things. I want to unite the bottle caps and this beautiful plastic bead for a perfect pointy lightning rod tip of the tower. And for that, I'm going to use a humble toothpick through the bead to secure it on. And I'm going to melt a hole through the plastic of the bottle cap by heating up a pokey tool with a lighter for a few seconds, and then pressing the toothpick through and securing it with some hot glue, snipping off the excess toothpick and adding more hot glue for good measure. At this stage, the decoupage parts have dried, and I'm going to use hot glue to unite them all. Hot glue is good enough at this stage, as there will be other steps that will secure them together. Again, I'm just happy for the free texture, kind of like architectural detail that I get with the design of the golden bottle cap. I carefully stack everything and try to center them the best I can. Next, I'm going to be working with air dry clay. So I laid down a sheet of parchment paper because clay doesn't stick to it. I have a little bowl of water to dip my fingers into, and I'm working the clay a little bit, warming it up with my hands before I start sculpting. And first of all, I'm going to fill in some unsightly grooves to sort of make all the things I just stacked and glued together be more cohesive, part of one thing, especially here around the roof. On this section, I used a little sculpting tool to give some texture to that portion that got filled in with clay. I also added some snakes of clay to this ground level, sort of sculpting a more gentle slope, filling in the abrupt gap. With the structural stuff out of the way, I could finally get to the fun stuff. I just rolled out a piece of clay quite thin, and using some shape cutters, I'm going to cut out a half moon piece and a rectangle for a big front door. It's going to be a nice double door. I also used a silicone tipped tool dipped in water to sculpt some wood grain into these pieces before they dry out too much. To attach my clay pieces to the base, I'm going to use some PVA glue to help, as well as small amounts of water to soften edges. For door handles, I decided to use 2 seed beads. I tried to find the 2 most identical ones, and I added them to my door by using a bit of PVA glue and pressing them into the clay. With a small oval shape cutter, I cut out some tiny bricks to frame the entrance door with. It was a bit finicky, and the clay kept wanting to stick inside the cutter, but it was fun. It's sort of like cutting shapes out when making cookies. I also attached these with beads of glue. I was thinking of those stereotypical castle and dungeon door frames with the individual masonry stones. I think it very much makes people think of fantasy or fairy tale places. To give them a bit of a stone-like texture, I lightly pressed a strip of coarse sandpaper. I rolled out more clay, and with a pair of square shape cutters, I cut out some window frames. They didn't turn out very neat, as once cut out they were quite flimsy, but I think imperfections like that add to the charm of the project. In fact, it influenced the direction I was going in, with the whole tower being a little bit uneven and oddball masonry to it. I continued attaching my clay pieces with the same method of adding a little bit of PVA glue, attach, sculpt and shape with a bit of water. I kept the bottom section of the wizard tower separate from the top so that it remains as a functional container. I conditioned and rolled out even more clay, and this time I tried pre-texturing it with that coarse sandpaper and with even more shape cutters. I started to cut out many small bricks in 2 different sizes. I think this was one of my favorite parts of the project this time, as cutting those little shapes out is so satisfying. I wish I could convey that feeling through video. When I had a good supply of them, I started attaching them in little aesthetic clusters, mainly grouping them around the windows and occasionally just having a few individuals floating to break up the space. As I went, I continued to use that strip of coarse sandpaper to texture as I went along, as every time I pressed on the little bricks with my finger, I would lose some of the texture. To prevent the door from looking like it's floating, I added a sort of foundation row of the smaller bricks right under it. And I also kept going and adding bricks until I was happy with the space distribution. Of course, I still had the upper part of the tower, and once again I cut out a ton of tiny bricks in the 2 different sizes, and I went through the same process all over again. I also added some more detailing to the roof part by attaching some plastic rhinestones with the same method as I did the beads for the door handles, PVA glue, and pressing them into the clay. When done with sculpting, I left all the clay to dry overnight. The next day, everything is dry and firmly attached, and after a quick inspection, it's time for painting. For the base coat, I wanted to make a warm gray, so I'm mixing a lot of white, a little bit of yellow, and a tiny bit of black to get to my desired color. I'm using acrylic paints, of course. On the first pass, I'm just going to cover everything. This is a good foundation for other colors to stick to. And this way, if any of the background will peek through, it will be my chosen wall color. After the base coat drying, I started on the inside of the windows. I painted them with a mixture of white and warm yellow, as I wanted them to have a nice warm glow. The lights are on, the wizard is home. Next, I chose 3 warm colors and I painted all the bricks individually, alternating between the 3 colors, trying to stay away from accidentally creating patterns. I tried to do this carefully, staying just on the raised bricks, but accidents happen, of course. This portion of the video is sped up a lot. This was actually quite slow going and meticulous, and I was using a small brush, trying my best to do precise work and it took me quite a while. But in a way, it's not so different from, say, a coloring book. It can be relaxing. I painted the roof in a nice bright red. I am just fond of red roofs. I used a darker brown for all the little window frames. I think they would be made out of wood. And I also used that brown on this upper section of the tower to repeat the color. And of course, the door got base coated with the same brown. As I'm working on the project, paint is drying in earlier portions, so it was dry enough for me to go back into the windows to brighten them up. At this point, I decided to add a bit of variation to the grey portion. I'm not sure how much of that shows in the final project, but I can't say that I'm sorry for my efforts to add more detail to a project, even if it doesn't show in the end. I went back to add a much lighter chalky brown to that balcony section, and I added some color variation with my finger to some of the bricks as well. With a small brush, I also added variation to the window frames and with my finger to the door. It's so fantastic how the wood grain pops out once I apply the second lighter color on top. I also decided to color this section of the tower, as I think that lip would definitely gather lots of dirt and make a good foundation for wild seeds to take hold in that soil. I'm quite happy with the paint job at this point, so I made a mixture of yellow shellac ink with a little bit of brown acrylic paint to seal it all in and give it a nice warm wash. I really like the dual purpose of the shellac ink. It's quickly become one of my favorite crafting substances. The shellac ink needs quite a while to fully dry, but once it's done, it's almost waterproof. I wanted to add the metallic accents after the shellac ink, as they lose luster if they're covered by a tinted varnish. I only painted the door handles and the actual red roof. I wanted to make it look like a shiny copper roof. I think it adds a bit of a grandiose vibe, like certain old churches, and I also thought it would work really well with the lightning rod idea for conductivity. With all the painting completed and dry, it's time for mossifying and details. For rocks, I'm going to use these pieces of cork that already naturally look like stones. However, to stick the moss on, I add a lot of PVA glue to some foam scatter. Mix it really well, sort of creating a paste and diluting a bit with water so it becomes a bit easier to manipulate. But before the moss, I decided to add the cork pieces as little debris that would settle on the horizontal surfaces. I'm just going to create little random clusters, just attaching them with a bit of PVA glue, picking out spots that just look nice. I'm mainly going to add them on this lip and up in the balcony section. Those would be the places that heavy wind would carry the debris to. I've been calling it moss, but at this scale I think it's more like crawling vegetation, like ivy or something. I'm sure you have seen in real life sides of entire buildings completely covered by crawling vegetation. I think the spaces in between the bricks would make a very hospitable environment for all the creeping vines to find purchase and keep growing and covering everything beautifully. Every time I pass by a building like that, I have to stop and admire for a second. I keep going and adding the greenery all over almost every part of the tower, including the copper roof. It looks kind of horrible now, milky and dull, but it will dry beautifully green. To add a bit more detail, I use these tiny miniature leaves, which are actually just birch seeds, and I glue them on one by one here and there, as if they just got blown over from trees nearby and got caught up on the vegetation. It's just a small detail, but I think when you look closely and you catch one of those perfect little leaves that nature created, it's just delightful. I also added little clusters of flowering plants to the balcony area. These ones are actual miniature plants. They have beautiful little heart-shaped leaves and yellow flowers. I just had them in my stash, so I just used them. But I think this is like the most premium crafting supply I used on this entire project. It could easily be skipped. I'm also adding some pieces of dried moss for a little bit of color and texture variation all throughout the tower. I left that to dry overnight once again. And as promised, everything turned to a beautiful green. For a final touch, I'm going to add some miniature grass clumps for even more variation. Once again, this is not really necessary. It might even be overkill, but I just can't stop myself from wanting to add more and more details to my projects. And I was very enamored with the idea that the wizard who lives here has let the outside of his tower be completely overtaken by nature, reveling in the beauty that it created in the combination with the original masonry. Finally satisfied, I present to you the finished wizard's tower. I'll remind you, I started with a plastic ice cream cup, a candle tin, and some bottle lids. Trash can really be turned into treasure. Let me know what you think about this project in the comments. I always love to read your feedback. If you lived in a tower, would you let the plants take over? I'll leave you to enjoy the close-ups, but please don't forget to press the like button and maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I upload a new crafty video every week. Thank you for watching. I hope you're having a nice day. Bye.